Hey everyone, James here, going to be talking about Italian genre films, specifically Gialli. And today I'm talking about perhaps the most special era of Giallo. In fact, definitely the most special era of Giallo, Golden Age Gialli. And I'm defining that as sort of between the years of 70 to 75. And if you're into the films, I guess it's sort of earmarked by Bird with the Crystal Plumage at the beginning, really bringing in that boom, and Deep Red at the end. For the sake of simplicity, I'm not using those exact release dates, so there might be films released in 75 after Deep Red or in 1970 before Bird with the Crystal Plumage that are included in this list. I was not quite that retentive to just kind of go through all of those and figure out what was before and what was after. So sort of just more casually and loosely defined as 1970 to 1975, so 6 years in there. And this is really kind of an interesting time in the sense that it's also kind of peak Italian film industry. If you sort of look at those graphs of the domestic share of the strength of just Italian commercial cinema, 75 is kind of where it absolutely peaked, but pretty much strong, especially through the early 70s. And from 75, it really went down quite fast to 1980, where I think it's like about half the size. And by the end of the 80s, it's like just a very, very small fraction of what it was back in 1975. So at this point, the Italian film industry very, very much going quite strong. I think we were just sort of pinpoint apex Gialli, where just the most were getting made. Probably go for something kind of a little bit earlier, so maybe 71, 72, 73, something in that range. But there's a lot of films created just slightly after that that I think also would very much qualify into the kind of like the peak Gialli period. In particular in this list, I think one thing that I was looking out for too are like the sort of the big four directors who I see as Argento, of course, Mario Bava, Sergio Martino, and Lucio Fulci. Just kind of the big auteurs of the Gialli. And there's a couple others too that you could sort of slot in there. For me, at least, I'm not the biggest Umberto Lenzi fan. For me, he had a lot of films that I would not quite put on the level of the films that I wanted to highlight here. Another one, Luciano Arcoli, who I like a lot of his films too, but a lot of, for me at least, for those two directors, a lot of 6 out of 10s, 7 out of 10s, and in this period, it's really quite a strong list of films in the sense that the honorable mentions that I'm going to mention, which are 15, and sort of the ones that actually made that top 6, they're just really good films, and I'd probably pick all of those films above, for instance, the honorable mentions in the 1980s Gialli, where I do like those films, but I do think that sort of your backlog of just very, very solid genre efforts here made by effective filmmakers during this time, I think is just a little bit better. And I think some of that speaks towards the Italian film infrastructure at this time, just a lot of very, very talented people and very creative people working during this period. Another thing I noted too is like of those big four directors, really this is perhaps the MVP of this list is someone like Sergio Martino, who really made his best work, his best Gialli work, which I think is probably the best work of his career just during this period. And his work, his Gialli work outside of this period is really not very good in my opinion. Whereas you have someone like Fulci and Argento, who of course did some very good films during this period, but also continued to make some very, very good films afterwards. Stuff like New York Ripper, Tenebrae, those I think are amongst the very best Gialli, but very much outside that range. Similarly, Mario Bava, Blood and Black Lace, probably his best Gialli outside of this golden era too. So I think if you're actually to give an MVP, it might go to perhaps the smallest name of that big four in Sergio Martino. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, just in terms of making the list. So just going to quickly run down the list. Again, a very, very stacked list of films. There's tons of 7 and 8s out of 10, just a lot of just really solid, really fun films to dig into. So, of course, with the nature of these lists, especially one where the backlog, the bullpen, the lineup, the bench is just so lined up as this. There's a lot of subjectivity that goes into this. So I'm going to list these fast because there's a lot of them. So here are my 15 sort of honorable mentions. Autopsy, I really like this film. Armando Crispino, just a lot of great atmosphere. I think that's the main thing that sticks with me is like that southern Italian, slightly gothic atmosphere and just like just very decrepit. Really like that. Killer Must Kill Again, Luigi Cozzi. Just a really fun film. It has a great sort of just premise to it. Yeah, just really like that film too. And a couple lesser Sergio Martinos. The other ones I think make sort of that top 6. So Case of a Scorpion's Tail, Suspicious Death of a Minor, and All the Colors of the Dark. Another one, Spanish one, Belle from Hell, if that's allowed to be included. I like that film too. Red Queen Kills 7 Times, Case of the Bloody Iris, Fifth Chord, Aldo Short Night of Glass Dolls. That's one that I could see potentially moving up the list if I rewatched it at some point. Just another great hook and premise there. Fifth Chord, perhaps one of the most gorgeous Gialli. Smile Before Death, just kind of a fun one. Black Belly of the Tarantula. And for me, these two Argentos don't quite make that top 6. Cat o' Nine Tails and Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Bird with the Crystal Plumage is probably going to be making most people's top 6 Gialli from 1970-75. For me, I like elements of it. Of course, the cinematography by... Jesus, I'm forgetting his name. The guy that did Fifth Chord and Apocalypse Now is just really, really good in this film. For me, it's just a little bit uneven. This would probably be number 7 on the list if I were to include it. It's a very, very striking film, and you can see why it let it take off. But there are films that I actually do enjoy a little bit more on this list. And last but not least, Fragment of Fear, another David Hemmings Gialli, kind of a fun one to see. Also, the name of a really good Gialli podcast that I would recommend people check out. Unfortunately, not making a ton of new podcasts these days, but a very, very good podcast, probably the best podcast on Gialli. All right, so top 6. So these are my personal 6 favorites from this era, and I've probably seen at least 100 from 1970 to 75, just looking at this. And those 15 up there, those are all really good. Definitely recommend everyone go check them out. So I don't mean to cast any shade on any of those films at all. For me, they're all ones that I like quite a bit, enough that I want to highlight them on this episode. Okay, so there's one film that I personally put just like as the masterpiece of this era. And so I'll mention that one last. But starting from the bottom, Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. The Sergio Martino Black Cat one. And it's personally my favorite adaptation I've seen of sort of that Black Cat basic story. A lot of sleaze in it. We got some Edwidge Fenwick with short hair. Just a lot of characteristics of a well-made film of the time. Yeah, just really good golden era Gialli. I think in particular the last half an hour of this really, really does stand out. Yeah, just really solid film. From Mario Bava, Bay of Blood. This is a film that has just risen each time I've seen it. I don't know as a story if it's the most engaging, which I think is one of the reasons why this is one of those like slow burn kills. But if you just look at it as like individual segments and stuff like that, it's just so incredibly well done, and even more impressive the sense that just because he did it on such a low budget. So I think some people will highlight this film as just being sort of more historically important and interesting because of that. I think it's a really good movie. I personally would pick this over just about every slasher. I'm more of a Giallo fan than a slasher fan, of course, but this is, Bay of Blood. I mean, hugely influential, just really, really good. Just Mario Bava is probably the technical master craftsman of all Gialli, and he's just so good at what he does. And so the way he just stages all of this stuff, paper thin plot, of course, but it's just a wonderful film. Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. I kind of put this one in the same category as Your Vice is Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. For me, it's a little bit more fun than in that film. I like sort of the Edwidge role in that, a little bit more the different settings and stuff like that. Just very, very classic Gialli in the sense that you have George Hilton, directed by Sergio Martino, produced by Luciano Martino, written by Ernesto Gastaldi. So tons of stuff. Really great set piece at the end with the ice cube. For me, one of those just very, very watchable films that leaves a smile on my face. Is it a masterpiece? I don't think I'd go quite there, but I do really, really like it. And it sort of competes with the next film on my list for my favorite Martino, and that film is Torso. So Torso is probably Sergio Martino's most unique Gialli. Well, I guess you could say Suspicious Death of a Minor is kind of unique too, but I think Torso pops a little bit more, just the way it goes. Love the third act. Perhaps my most favorite third act in a Giallo film. Just pure Hitchcock in that sense. Just like a lot of just non-dialogue storytelling going on. So yeah, I just really like the way that Torso is constructed. I think it's extremely suspenseful. It's one of the perhaps truly suspenseful Gialli. And Stage Fright, I rewatched that film recently, and a lot of that third act also reminds me of Torso and stuff like that. And I wonder if Michele Soavi did study Torso before he made that film. Yeah, so really, really love Torso. Definitely one of my absolute favorites. Number 2, I have Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling. Big fan of this film too. Another one that is sort of like a slow burn and has risen in my my esteem, I guess, throughout the years. So yeah, one of those films that you wouldn't think that this is particularly rewatchable, but I actually like it each rewatch, even though the material is a little bit more heavily. Very different than an Argento film, so in that sense I like it too, because it kind of stands out. A little bit more social criticism and stuff like that baked into it, and yeah, it's just a very different take than kind of your Animal trilogy or the number 1 film on my list. And in my opinion, along with Tenebrae, the absolute Gialli masterpieces sort of alternate between my 1A and 1B as far as just like my overall list of Gialli. Deep Red. Just love the film. For me, this is just Argento putting everything together, and it has just such a balance of score, atmosphere. The set pieces are incredible. It's just everything that to love about the genre, and this is honestly the film that I recommend everyone start with when they come to Gialli. I think Tenebrae tends to be a film that probably rewards you if you are a little bit more familiar with Argento and a little bit more familiar with Giallo, but I think Deep Red is kind of like just a classic. Like you get the goblin. It's not like overbearing to the level of Suspiria and stuff like that. So in that sense, I think it might even be a better starting point for Argento than something like Suspiria. But love the film. It's been one of my favorites, and definitely the film that just sort of like hooked me into Gialli, and you're just like, what is this? And I want to see more of these things and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, that is my list. Let me know where you agree or disagree. Let me know what your top 6 are from 1970 to 1975. And if you like this episode, feel free to shout out different ideas. Give the thumbs up button if you liked it, and hit that subscribe button as well. I will see y'all next time.